your host, Sir Strife, or Strife for short. And tonight we have Jade Beyer, Realistic Nihilist, Wit, Johan, and Angry Pumpkin. And James Stonewall, if you get James Stonewall. But yeah, so Wit, where you been?
My computer broke, 2 weeks ago?
I thought it was a week ago.
It was 2 weeks ago. It was during the after show.
Oh yeah, your computer crapped out on everybody. Did you
It
upload
broke.
Did you upload the episode yet?
I literally just turned it on like 2 seconds ago, 2 minutes ago.
Oh.
So.
Is it fixed or is it brand new?
No, I just plugged it in earlier and it started charging for the first time in 2 weeks. It hadn't been charging it.
Oh, so it wasn't fixed. It just.
I don't know what I don't know. It's a mystery. It's working though. That's all that matters.
Hooray!
Until it decides to stop working.
Precisely.
Where the fuck are we going with this?
Show out. What's the topic this week?
Well, anything. It's the after show. And Johan, please fix it so we don't hear your keyboard.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I'll mute it for a second.
What the hell is he talking about anyway? I wonder what he's typing about. He's probably thinks he's right about some quantum physics thing that has to do with God.
I don't know. I mean, next week that is the topic.
What?
What do you think the universe is essentially? Physical or mental? That's the question.
Hey, I got something I could clarify. I would like Raatz to maybe clarify concerning his argument. Are you there, Raatz?
Also, we have a guest from yesterday coming on.
Yeah, I'm there.
Well, I've just been thinking about it because it seems like there's a problem with the argument that you typically, at least the one I'm familiar with, the one that says, things aren't there.
What he's saying, Raatz, is give your premises about solipsism in the mind.
No, not that one. The one where you argued that, the one with when DPR was on, I forget, DPR and someone else, I think it was Aaron Ra maybe. But you were arguing, from physics that things aren't there when we're not looking at them. And that seemed to be one of the premises. And then
Yes.
later in the argument, though, it seemed that you were arguing things are there when you don't look at them. And it's because things are there when you're not looking at them that, therefore, you deduce a mind to keep everything...
I see.
Keep
Yes,
things manifest when you aren't looking at them. In other words,
it's the omniscience. This is the omniscience problem, basically. Basically, it's kind of complicated, but the gist of it is that we're parts of God's mind. So it's not just our mind doing it, but the other thing is that there is a sense in which God is looking at it, right? So God's looking at this object, and he's filling in the line, so to speak, right?
Yeah, and if God's looking at it, then it is there when humans aren't looking at it.
It's there to an extent.
But that goes against... It what?
It's there to an extent is the catch. See, the idea is that once you zoom in on it, you discover that to the extent that God is not looking at it, there is undefined stuff. And then you look at those further, and then they become more defined.
Can I jump
and that's
in?
with respect to your own reality frame, so...
So you're saying it's vaguely there when God's... So you're saying there are things that are there when God's not looking? Or wouldn't everything, therefore, by virtue of its existence, be looked at by God?
You have a bunch of Skype...
Wait, Raatz?
Yeah?
Yeah, the problem with that is that with the double slit experiment, it's not necessarily the mind, it's the machine that they use to measure the wave function of the particle that interferes with it. That's why you can't measure it.
Right. The question then is who collapses the wave function of the measuring device?
Why is it a who?
Obviously.
It's the thing that they use to measure it. It's not a
So let's say we take a camera and have the camera measure the photodetector, right? And then we have another camera measure that camera and so forth. But then with respect to yourself, it's not there in your own reality frame, right? Because you haven't seen it. You haven't collapsed the wave function yourself, and so it's
Buddy.
You're already assuming that
it's
the
the von. You know what a von Neumann chain is, right?
Yes, I know what that is.
Wait. I think James Stillwell's having issues. James, are you here with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
You hearing everything?
What's that?
The von Neumann architecture?
You guys are kind of like choppy. I don't know if it's my end or what.
I don't know. Someone
Especially
says,
Raatz.
Your end. Totally your end.
Yeah, I'm thinking that too.
I can hear Strife quite well.
Jade is not coming in whatsoever.
Sounds like Animal Crossing.
What were you saying, Raatz?
Well, so
let me ask to clarify. Are things there when humans aren't looking at them, or are they?
with respect to our reality frame, they're not. Basically, God is looking at God is looking through multiple perspectives. It's all subjective information, and so it's it's there as like non-local quantity. It's not there.
So as far as we're concerned, when we're not looking at things, they're not there.
Yeah. The wave functions are all lined up, though, just such that when we look at them again, they all recollapse just as though they were there the whole time. So.
When we
What do you mean
look at
collapse?
But it seems like the only way you get to God from that is by invoking God as the thing which makes things there when you're not looking at them. In effect, things are there when you're not looking at them, and that's how you get to your God conclusion, is it not?
Say that again?
Don't you? It seems like you start with that premise, but then later on you negate it, and that's exactly how you get to the God conclusion. You say there is something there looking at it, that there is something there making it exist, something there looking at it when we're not, and that thing, that mind, is what you call God, and that's how you deduce God, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, the thing. Well, it's a little more complicated than that, but the thing is that. See, I'm a panentheist, so panentheism is such that, you're not like some separate mind than God. You're a projection. You're a component of God's mind, right? Basically, I could use the physics to do solipsism, but I say, I'm not a solipsist, and so therefore, it's either solipsism or I'm a product of a larger mind, a projection of a larger mind.
Or you're just wrong. Don't throw it out off the table.
When you say that we can conceive of a solipsist world, do you mean that the mind creates that world, or do you think that the universe exists that contains that mind?
When I say I can conceive, what do you mean for like the modal logic argument I use?
Yeah, because I can't.
The basic point of that, the point of that was basically that anything that you see, that you experience, you could also experience in theory in a dream world, right?
But the thing is, does the mind create that reality? Is the primacy of consciousness the primacy of existence?
Well, so the argument I had, this was the introspective argument, was that it is possible for the mind to it is possible that the mind could exist in a world where it's the primacy of consciousness. Okay. Not to say that that's true at that point, but it's conceivable. There's nothing.
Where are you saying where existence is the primacy of consciousness?
Yeah, you can conceive of a world where existence is the primacy of consciousness and the mind is. And the reason you can do that is because everything that we can see, we can also conceive of it as being in a dream.
So you're saying that. But the thing is, the mind has to exist in a larger reality in order to produce what it's producing.
But that presupposes against idealism, though.
No, but what I'm saying is reality has to exist by definition.
Right, but whatever reality, the whole point here is that we're arguing of whether or not reality is mental in nature, fundamentally.
Well, I mean, even if, then how can you say that the mind exists if everything that exists is in the mind? Then how does the mind exist?
The mind is existence. That's the view.
Well, it seems like it's kind of like asking how does the universe exist if the universe is all that exists. So.
Well, I mean, the universe is defined.
It's not that it's like
existence
in the
exists.
mind, like it's not like it's in the mind in the sense that like the objectivists say, where they it's like they're conceiving of the
existence
mind as
exists.
being some additional thing to the existence. I'm just saying the mind is existence. There's nothing outside of existence. The mind is not outside of existence, holding existence together. The mind just is existence.
Then how does the mind? Then how does? So you're saying that your first argument for, like, if we're talking on an epistemological level, your first axiom is that the mind.
So fucking stupid. It's retarded. To say that the mind is existence. You're saying that you identify all of existence. Yeah, you know that you can pinpoint exactly what all of existence is, and that's an argument from ignorance, and it sounds fucking stupid.
No, it's not an argument from ignorance.
I don't think that's what he's
What I'm
saying.
saying is you can conceive that, not to say whether it's true or not at this point, but you can conceive that the mind is the mind is all there is. There is you're in some solipsist world, for example. Wit does.
Well,
think
wait,
that's
hold on.
One at a
Hold on.
time.
I think
One at a time. One at a time.
I just want to
So
clarify. When you say solipsist world, are you saying that the world contains the mind, or that the mind creates the world?
but the mind is
They're one and the same.
But then why are you describing a solipsist world? If you're, I mean, then what is a solipsist world?
essentially
all
a
of
dream world
experience.
with no outside.
A dream world with no outside.
Yeah, it's just a
Okay.
dream world. You stop at experience, and that's it. And there's no experience beyond yourself or your mind or anything like
Then
that.
how can I conceive of that if there's no outside? You need to have an outside in order to conceive of something
No,
from a
you-
third-person
you-
perspective.
Wait.
We're not
Can
conceiving
you
it from a
conceive of
first-person
things you
perspective.
haven't experienced? Can you conceive?
I agree, realistic nihilist. The
No,
premise.
that was my question.
What did you say?
Is it possible to conceive of something you have absolutely no experience of,
Yes.
in any shape, way, or form? Such as what?
Yes. Color.
You have no experience of color?
You can't
Nothing.
conceive of color.
Nothingness. You can conceive of nothingness.
Can
No,
you?
you can't. Nothing is an absolute. There's no such thing as actual nothing. There has to be some state of existence. There can't be absolute non-existence.
But can you conceive of nothing?
That would be not conceiving of anything.
But it seems like you're suggesting that we can only conceive of it if it lies outside of our experience?
What?
Like, why can't you conceive of existence being only that which you've experienced? I mean, by definition, you can only experience what you experience. You can't ever experience anything beyond that. So what grounds do you have for saying anything exists beyond your experience?
But what I'm saying is that when you're talking about being able to conceive of a world in which the mind is just existence, how can I conceive of that if there's no outside?
Well, then you couldn't
Right.
conceive of existence
Wow,
either,
I
right?
don't.
If there's no outside, then
By that
how can I?
definition, you couldn't.
Well, can you conceive of existence even though you can't conceive of something outside of existence?
That's what I
No,
was about
because
to ask.
existence has to exist.
But you can't conceive of existence then, right?
I do conceive of existence, and yes, I can conceive of existence.
So then you can conceive of something outside of existence.
Isn't anything outside of existence
No.
non-existing?
Non-existence.
Yeah.
Well, that was your criteria.
Okay, so-
You said, how can I conceive of it if I can't think of something outside of it?
Because when you're talking about, there's no such thing as absolute non-existence. Things exist because there are rearrangements of things that already do exist. Fundamental particles, for example. So I can conceive of a unicorn, even though unicorns probably don't exist, because I can conceive of an arrangement of atoms that would match a unicorn. You understand?
Yeah, but but that's not what, I don't think that has much to do with what we were talking about. That's an example of you conceiving of something that doesn't exist, I guess. But it exists in a very specific sense. Yes.
Well,
But how does
let me-
that show that the mind cannot be all of reality? How does that demonstrate that?
Because when you talk about when you talk about conceiving of a solipsist world, then you already have to have an outside in order to conceive of it from a third person perspective. You
Look,
do.
you have to produce a
No, but
dichotomy.
there is no third person perspective. That's the whole point of solipsism.
Then how
You
can
have
you conceive of something if there's no third person perspective?
well,
What
You can
perspective?
see with your own eye, right?
I'm guessing
You're
you
right.
don't. Maybe you don't
That's first
understand what solipsism is.
if I can just
I would
interject here, real
suggest.
quick. If I can just interject, I actually wrote a paper on this as far as conceptualization. So you guys were talking about a unicorn, and a unicorn is just a horse and with a horn on it, and so your brain is just doing elaborate Photoshop and putting these two concepts, which you have experienced in the past, together. I mean, this is nothing new. I mean, Aristotle used this against Plato.
Yes.
So it seems like our options here are either our minds are totally it's just innate knowledge in how to these shapes, how to visualize these shapes. They're just innately in us.
Is that Plato? Plato
Or
thought of
we're
that, right?
I'm sorry?
Is that Plato's idea that everything's like innate or whatever? What you just said? Whose idea was that?
There's this realm of forms, and
Yeah,
everything's
platonic forms, like numbers and the laws of logic and things like that. Yes.
okay. And what Aristotle was more of a physicalist about this, and he would say,
Yes.
no, everything you can conceptualize is not from some ethereal realm. It's because you've made observations around you and all of these concepts of concepts that you have seen in the past. So I would say that that existence is actually always in a state of becoming. There's no being.
Yes.
And these concepts are just they're just snapshots of this of a certain process or a certain state in this process of becoming. So you look, for example, we could take geology. So a rock may be round now that we find in a river, but 1,000 years from now it may be, or who knows, 1 billion years from now, it may be another shape. So, but you have taken a picture, you have seen this with your mind, and now you have this concept called roundness or circleness. So that's why all of these concepts, as Nietzsche noted, don't really match up to reality. We try to see the world through these concepts, but because the world is always changing, our view of the world is actually false in the sense that we think of being, we think of static and unchangingness because we're looking at it through these frozen snapshots in time, if you will.
Yes.
If I can address wit here, when we're talking about this, you have to devise a dichotomy. You have to have an experiencer and you have to have an experienced. There has to be some dichotomy.
Oh.
What?
I mean, if you prefer dichotomy, I guess, and I don't even think that's a problem. But I don't think you don't have to invoke the experiencer.
Look, there's what they call the subject-object agreement, and in this sense, there's this paradigm where there's a subject and an object, and you're saying the subject is the object. That's begging the question. You start off with the conclusion first.
Yeah.
No. that's what solves. Okay. That's not the argument. That's not like the argument to just start with the conclusion. I mean, if you're talking about what solipsism proposes, then yes, that's what it proposes. That there is no I mean, I would agree with how you said it. I mean, that's one way to say it, that the subject is the object, or rather, you could just say there is no subject in the normal sense of the word. I mean,
So
the
there
subject
is
would
no-
be
so there is
everything
no
that is.
perception.
That would be the only kind of subject there could be.
It's
Or no
defeating
subject
the
at all.
argument, because you're saying you're saying that there is no perception. The subject is necessarily the perceiver. There is a perceiver and a perceived. If you're saying
Yes.
that,
I'm not saying that.
But
no,
there has to be.
if
in
you're
order-
saying that the culmination of existence is your perception, you're saying that you separately perceive existence.
Well,
Yes.
that's why I choose not to frame it in terms of that, because it can get confusing if you. I mean, it all has to do with language games, as far as I'm concerned. Those words,
games.
you.
Language games.
Well, yes, you has a completely different meaning in this context. So you is no longer this separate individual. The you in solipsism just is a representation of all, or it's just a synonym for everything that's experienced, for experience itself, which is to say everything.
But
So there's
the problem with
no
that-
division. The only one making the divisions here is the non-solipsist.
But okay, so you're saying that perception is impossible in solipsism.
No, perception's all that exists.
But then what is the perceiver?
Yeah, see, the problem
perce-
here is...
well,
No, you can't. Here's the problem here. You cannot say, if you're a solipsist, you cannot say you're perceiving anything because you're saying there's nothing to perceive. You can only
Yeah.
say that you're creating.
Yes.
But you cannot say that you're perceiver because that invokes a thought of there being something external. But in the solipsist universe, there is no universe. There's just you. So
and
there
that's-
is no...
That's exactly what I
Sorry,
meant
go
by confusing language games. You know, because when you say those words, we're used to using those words in certain ways, and when we're talking about solipsism, it has to be recognized that they take on completely different meanings and connotations. And so to just say those words and say, "Ha, therefore solipsism is wrong," you're not taking into account what those the context in which those words take on new meaning within solipsism. Like James said, you could maybe to clarify, you should say creating, perhaps. Maybe that would
generating
clarify. Or really to help clarify, I usually say, just forget about the self. There is no I. It's either the I, there is no I whatsoever, or the I is everything.
But
So
what
you're
are
saying
you
spirit.
generating?
No, wait, hold on. Wait, sorry. It's self-refuting to say that there is no I, because if you say I do not exist, that's a nonsense statement.
But again, I only in the realist sense of the I. The I as this separate individual that exists in this external world where there are all these divisions between one thing and another, existing independently from one another. And that is, existing independently from, say, my experience or a experience.
Okay, then I have a question. Is it on solipsism, is it your perception that your perception exists?
It certainly is.
Then how is that-
Experience is experienced, if that's what you're asking.
Well,
But how-
I think the problem
that
here
something-
is that there's a grammar. I mean, like our language has kind of, in a sense, bewitched us because our intuitions say there's an I, there's a subject, and then there's an object, right?
Yes.
And because of that, we go through day-to-day life thinking like that, and of course, we then model our language after that, right? And so then when we say there's a perception, we automatically think, by definition, there is a perceiver for that perception, right?
Well,
But
by
the point
definition,
is
yeah.
that, well, by definition, that's the problem. So we've created the thing is that we have created that definition in the first place. The definition is there. It may not actually be. It may simply be that reality is, Wittgenstein. You're probably familiar with Alfred North Whitehead, right? Pan-experientialism.
I'm familiar with him. I don't know if the rest of them are.
Okay. Yeah, but
Alfred
he
North
basically said that-
Whitehead?
Yeah,
Process and reality. Okay,
Yeah.
I've read.
He was basically saying that reality is simply moments of experience. That's the whole reality is. There isn't an I. It's the fundamental building block is the perception itself. And
There is no I? Wait.
I mean,
Well,
look,
there's an I.
if you prefer, you can label the I you can label experience as the I, and then you're not troubled by this, by having to say there is no I and being a, you know.
But you're already assuming that there's an I to
if
experience.
you really demand that you need to be able to say there is an I, then that's one way in which you could say it.
But doesn't experience need an experiencer?
Does a design need a designer?
Yes.
Really?
Because otherwise it's not a design, it's just reality.
So everything that exists needs a thing-er, in other words, right? For a mountain to exist, there needs to be a mountain-ear. There has to be a persona behind everything.
No, that's not saying there has to be a persona, but experience is necessarily personal and subjective.
There does need to be a predicate as far as everything we know.
Yeah.
Well, here, let me give you an example. So color, right? You experience color, but color isn't external to you. It's not.
Yes.
You can't pour me color. You can't quantify color. It's not a thing in the sense that it has borders and boundaries and things like that. It's not a. It's a spatial, a temporal. Okay, so you experience this color, and so, but this color is part of you. It is your experience, and you are your experience.
Wait,
there's no eye looking through this TV screen going, oh, there's color.
Yeah.
Does that kind of make sense, or no? If that didn't help.
I'm having trouble figuring out what you're driving at with that, though, because something needs to be perceived in order for your mind to fabricate color. Because your mind fabricates color. That's true.
Yeah.
But something needs to be perceived first. Light needs to be perceived before color can be conceived.
No, that is.
Well, I mean, that's begging the question on what we're talking about, but
that is actually your mind's interpretation of a certain wavelength.
Yes.
You don't actually see any of those things. You're looking through the interpretation. No matter whether an external world exists or not, you're never actually having any direct sensory input. Your mind is interpreting.
That's because there's no such thing as perfect experience. Your mind is fallible, and an experience is necessarily subjective. So look, they did this. Yeah.
I'm fine with the premise if someone first elaborates how you can divorce from the subject-object dichotomy without begging the question.
Yeah.
I mean, couldn't you say the subject-object dichotomy in itself begs its own question?
That's kind of what I was getting at before.
Yeah.
Why?
I mean, just to say a proposition isn't to beg the question.
Hold on, I didn't hear you, Whit. Say it again.
To assume that there has to be a subject-object dichotomy, or the opposite, neither one seems to me inherently, just in and of itself, to beg any kind of question. I mean, they both can be true or false, but it's not begging the question in the sense in which that phrase is usually meant, it seems to me.
Then what is experience? And then how do you know it exists?
This.
Okay, well, the subject is
right here.
self-attested.
What?
The subject is self-attested. You follow.
It all comes down to definitions. It comes down to how you're defining this subject and how you're defining the object.
The
If you're
object
defining
exists
them
by
inherently
definition.
in realistic terms, that is to say non-solipsistic terms, then okay, that's how you're defining them. I mean, I guess in that sense you could say it's begging the question. I mean, why?
No.
The question would then be, why are you defining them in that way? That's the question it would beg.
But
Wait, hold on. When you say that you can conceive of a solipsist world, for example, to conceive of something, there has to be some sort of referential sort of thing. You have to have some sort of reference in whatever reality you're in order to make that conception in your mind.
Exactly.
And that's necessarily third person, which is why when you're talking about
What if the conception is
You're third person to your own experience?
No, you're third person to conceiving of something. Conceiving is not the same thing as experience. That's what I'm trying to say.
Conceiving of something is not an experience?
It's not the same thing as experience in reality, because your experience in reality is subjective, and when you're conceiving of something, you're conceiving of your experience to some degree in that conception.
Yeah, sure, but is not conception itself an experience?
No, it's not, because it's not.
So you've never experienced conceiving something?
I have, but the object of my conception is not experiential.
Of course it is.
How?
The problem here is language. I mean, listen to what you're saying. You're asking, have you experienced something? By the way that question is phrased, you're presupposing two entities, you and the experience. So either there's a problem with grammar here, there's a problem with language. You know, that's the problem, is that our logic is built off of the subject-object dichotomy.
And
This is
that's
something that Nietzsche wrote.
That's the point, and I'm trying to figure out how to divorce those two in a way that you can actually talk about it. Because without it, like without divorcing those two first, or uniting them in some way, you're always going to be begging the question. So
No, yeah, I'm with you. I understand what you're trying to do. I'm just
there
saying
needs
that
to be terminology first that we can agree upon, that we can't ask questions about. And I think that would be on the solipsist to define that terminology.
To define the object and the subject?
No, to make it so there is no subject-object dichotomy and make that reasonable and conceptual.
Well, but then you could say it the other way. What are you meaning when you say you? Like the Buddhists will say, there is no you in the sense of there being an enduring self that is distinct, that is, unchanging. And they would say that the self, what we call the self, or the conventional self, doesn't exist in the sense that there's this unchanging person that continues from moment to moment. The only thing that really exists is experience. And if you look closely enough at your experience, you'll find that this is actually what you're calling yourself. This is actually what you're referring to as self.
I have another argument that because you cannot be it's a contradiction for a mind to be conscious of itself, to just be conscious of it without any reference point of reality.
So you're not conscious of yourself?
I'm not conscious of my consciousness without any referential point.
And what's the reference point?
Reality.
Yeah, but you reference what? Something you're not experiencing?
No, my observations of reality.
So your reference is something you've experienced. Which again is your
reality.
Consciousness.
Experience isn't reality unless you need consciousness to have an experience, is what I'm saying.
Yes, and nothing you've said indicates anything other than conscious experience.
But what I'm saying is that there has to be a reality to contrast. In order to contrast, you cannot be consciousness of your own consciousness independently of anything else.
How do you? Okay, I'll make it easy. How do you make a subject-object dichotomy from this unified experience? How do you do that? How is that done?
I feel like what you're actually asking is a question about the linguistic nature of like sentences, the subject-object predicate. Is that what you're talking about when you're talking about the subject object?
Okay, no, hold on. I perceive.
I mean, is that the thing that you're saying we inherently assume when we talk? I mean, you're talking about the like kind of linguistic, grammatical sense of subject object, as in sentences have a subject and an object.
No,
is that what
I'm
you're talking about?
Talking about strict perception. Objects are the perceived. Subject is the perceiver. Now, how do you make sense of saying that there is no perceiver, and nothing is perceived. They are unity. How do you make sense of that? How do you use that at all? How is that utilitarian in any sense of the word?
It's
Like
a
how
contradiction.
are you
It's a
how are you
contradiction.
separating them? I'm asking how, if there is this unity that is experience, how do you separate the subject, the perceiver, from the perceived? How is that even possible?
Well, first off, what I gave one answer to that, and even if I didn't separate the two, I don't see that that's antithetical to solipsism anyways. Even if there is this subject-object dichotomy, or subject-object, because it's
Because
just
the perceived is necessarily not in the mind. It has to exist first, and then
being
be perceived.
perceived is not in the mind.
I'm not saying that perception is not in the mind. I'm saying existence is paramount to perception. So whatever
A
you're
solipsist would
perceiving,
agree with that.
what?
A solipsist would agree with that.
Okay, so something outside of yourself needs to exist before being perceived?
No,
That's what I'm saying.
I thought you said existence is paramount to perception.
Right.
No, you guys are quit using the word perception. He's saying
And that's why they're
Existence
saying
exists.
experience.
when you use the word perception, you're presupposing by that very word that there's an external reality. In the solipsis universe, there is no external reality. There's no
Then
reality.
what are we
at all.
talking about? Then what are we talking about?
We're talking about this reality, the only one you can possibly experience.
So
Right, but
then-
I'm saying
Have
that,
you ever
they
experienced
don't
something
have
outside of your own
James,
experience?
James, I'm saying that they don't have a word that doesn't presuppose externalism. I'm saying that none of us have a word that doesn't presuppose externalism, and that's why I refute the first premise. That's why I refute the first premise, because you can't conceive of it. If you come up with a word that is cogent, that is sensible, that doesn't refer to externalism, then I'll accept the
Every
premise.
single word that's been spoken in this entire conversation does not necessarily. I mean, you could try to make the case. You could try to use it, but I think I could make a very persuasive argument for the exact opposite. That all of language is phenomenological, and that all words, all meaningful words, that is, can only be meaningful in the sense that they refer to some phenomenon, namely, a
some
phenomenon that is
external
experienced.
phenomenon.
They refer to
Yes, words
objects.
can only make sense in that they have some experiential reference.
Actually, it's the other way around. Experiential reference only makes sense linguistically. The qualia of your experience is based on language, age, culture, mood, and so forth. But I don't think it's the other way
Those
around.
are all things you've experienced.
Language, culture, age, mood are what shape qualia. If we're getting to that, that is what generates subjective experience.
So let's get down to the real question here. What we're talking about as far as an external world, okay? What we really experience is phenomenology. We experience phenomena, and we presuppose that there is some sort of external universe. We presuppose that these appearances are external to us, right? So if there isn't anything external to us, what is generating this phenomenology? That's the
That's my
question we
question.
should be asking. What is generating? And that presupposes, that very question presupposes
Exactly.
a generator.
Exactly. So it's an invalid question from the point
Then
of view
how
of the
can this
solipsist.
exist? Then how can this exist? How
It
can
exists in
existence
exactly
exist?
the way it does. Whatever
saying-
you're experiencing right now
You're saying
is
it's
all that experiences.
self-propagating. You're saying it's self-propagating, which is not the nature of experience. That's why it refutes itself. You're saying it propagates itself.
Yeah.
I will say that it is.
No,
that-
that's actually not what he said, though.
That's what you're saying.
No, what he was just saying is that that question itself presupposes a propagator. And I said that the solipsist
no,
denies
and
that's
I'm
why
saying,
it's
no, I'm
invalid to
saying
a
I'm going
solipsist.
with
Because it
I'm,
doesn't, it rejects the propagator. It simply says this, what you're experiencing right now, is it. At least in terms of what we could possibly talk about or know, this is it. Forget
well,
about
yeah.
generators and propagators.
I
This
don't
is
have a
it.
problem. No, look, I don't have a problem with epistemological solipsism. I don't have a problem with that. But to say that there is no external world is to say
Well,
that your experience is nothingness.
Well, actually, another problem with that is to say what. Another problem with that is to say that if you're going to say that there is no external world, you're assuming the existence of an external world to which that proposition can correspond.
exactly. That's why I try to phrase my understanding of solipsism in terms of, I mean, I think maybe an easier way, clear way
You
for
can't make
some
any
people
declarative
is to
statement.
think of it as agnosticism. It doesn't make any proposition about the external world. In other words, for the solipsist
That's
to
a
say that there
proposition.
isn't an external world is
That's a
just as
proposition.
meaningless to say that there
That,
is.
that's a proposition. You can't make any propositions in that world.
No, no. Of course you can. We're making them right now. You can't
But
make any
James,
propositions about the
you can't make
external
a truth
world.
claim without a reality.
restate what you just said, James, because I want to address that point.
Okay, because I think this really gets down to the nub of it, okay? And that is, if you're saying, because, all we have is phenomenology, all we have is our perception. We don't have any proof, nor could we ever, that there is something external to us. We just have appearances. Now, if you're saying this, then you have to say, then who or what is generating these appearances? Now, if you're saying that it's solipsism and that you're generating these appearances, right? Okay, then I understand that. But then you're still having two different objects here. You're having the generation and you're having the generator. So you still have a minimum of two entities, the generated and the generator.
Right.
Now, we need to ask ourselves, what do we mean by I? What are we talking about? Are we talking about a passive entity that just sits back and these phenomenologies happen regardless of whether we want it to happen or not? I think that's what we have to say, because I don't choose that little babies die in Africa. I don't choose to hallucinate some guy stabbing me in the leg. I don't choose these things. So if I were choosing these things, I would choose something that I would personally find to be pleasurable appearances or phenomenology. That's the problem that the solipsist would have, is it doesn't make any sense, because you still left with two entities, the generator and the generated, and the fact that unwanted things are generated. So
Hold on. Let me address this, because this is what I'm saying. You're saying there's not a generator or a generator in solipsist. I'm fine with that. I can acknowledge that, and I can say that existence is its own progenitor. That's fine. I have no problem accepting that. But the question you have to admit to is, how does that happen? The question you can never answer is how that happens. So we're not speaking of anything meaningful to us, because we don't know what we're talking about, because we don't know how that happens.
Well, on my form of idealism, I think would make more sense, and that is, there is an external in itself out there, and we are interpreting. We don't have direct access, but we are interpreting the world. Each organism, each type of life form is modeling the world in a way which works for it. So ants have a different primal consciousness than humans. We could never have an ant's first-person experience. This is another thing that ties into the hard problem of consciousness. Another reason why materialist science fails as far as solving consciousness, the problem of consciousness.
Why?
So we model these things, and what I would say is that this primal consciousness is the will to power. The will to power. Now, the part of ourselves that does calculations, cost assessments, right? This frontal lobe experience, this is a consequence of the will to power. This is something that we have evolved in order to master our environment and to cut it up into slices that work for us. So there's this part of the self that is consciousness, and that part of consciousness cannot exist without the brain. It just cannot simply, this calculative, logical assessment can't exist without the brain. So to say that there's this one part of self, and this is Nietzsche's advancement of Schopenhauer's idealism or ideal of the will, whereas Schopenhauer said there's a will to life, Nietzsche said no, there's a will to power, so he advances this. So what I'm saying is yes, there are correlates to this in itself, this reality, and we are interpreting it. We're not perceiving reality, we are perceiving our interpretation of reality, like color, for instance, we were just talking about, or pain. We evolved to feel pain for a survival reasoning, for power reasoning. And when our power is threatened, that is, when something threatens our telos, we become depressed, when we're not achieving our goals, our goal of dominating our environment, whether it be familiar relationships or whether it be, war or whatever, then we feel a negative feeling, which is a consequence of the will to power. In other words, the will to power is doing whatever it can to in other words, all of this is conducive, all of this that we have evolved, all of this type of qualia consciousness that we have generated are a product of this will to power, a product of this extending ourselves in our environment and dominating our environment. So it's all evolutionary.
Well, James, we've had conversations, and obviously you know that I respect the hell out of you, and I think you're incredibly bright, but I worry that when you tend to go and emphasize the will of power, is that you shouldn't necessarily have, it shouldn't, I worry that it's the situation where you have where the will of power is the hammer and then everything looks like a nail. I wonder if you're just sort of injecting a concept that maybe isn't necessary. I think it's evidently true from biology, from cognitive science, that minds are necessarily built with constraints such that they fit the paradigm in which they came up in. But it's not, the constraint is not something that is grandiose, but rather something that is at one part almost purely physical, in the sense that the way that our minds develop, if you look at sort of human evolution.
You broke up a little bit there. I didn't hear the last part, but I heard most of it.
Because of other adaptations. On the other hand, if you look at classic cognitive science experiments regarding trying I would have to open up a book and remind myself who the experimenter was, but they tried to teach chickens how to play baseball. I have a version of baseball. I have no idea why they tried to do this, but it was to prove Skinner's behaviorism thesis, and they just couldn't learn it because their minds are constrained by, the way we've bred them. And I think that we don't necessarily need this overarching concept of a will to power, and instead we should focus on a case-by-case basis what the constraints are and why they're there.
I'll be out there after this show, so yeah.
Well, okay, but when I'm talking about will to power, I'm talking about a primal desire. And each
Oh, hey guys, I have to do something. I'll be back in about 5 minutes, okay?
All right. Each individual is a hierarchy of wills, as I brought up in our discussion concerning free will.
Mm-hmm.
And the mind, or the cost assessment, allows us to do cost assessments. Well, okay, I want a stereo, but my desire to not get arrested outweighs my desire for stereo, so I'm not going to, gratify that desire. So the will to not be imprisoned, to have power, outweighs the will to have the stereo. So I'm not saying that this will to power is an addition to mechanistic biology and all that stuff. I'm saying they are actually numerically one. There is a double aspect theory.
I see what you mean.
There are two aspects of the same thing.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Your internet went through. I thought you were done speaking. My
That's fine.
mistake.
You can go ahead. This is a theory, and I'm totally not married to it, and I'm open to objections and all of that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just worry that it's one of those things where you're not necessarily adding explanatory scope, but you're not adding trusses to the bridge. You're adding flowery ornaments. If you get what I'm saying.
Because it explains. I think it explains a lot. At least, even if you were to take this out of the realm of metaphysics, it still explains much about human relationships, about human history. I can show you how this is a psychological mechanism that fits and explains history quite well, and all human relationships. I'm not prepared to do that now, but I've done that in a lecture. But that's another story. But I like to use it more as a psychological mechanism. The metaphysical stuff is, like I said, just a hypothesis, and you can say, well, we don't have any scientific evidence for the will to power, so you're just adding something there. Well, not exactly, because this will to power is known imminently. Just like every time you have a will to enact your telos, and this is what I mean by will to power. So I'll give you a quick example. So you probably have political views. You probably support gay marriage. You probably don't like people telling you what you can and cannot do in your bedroom. So you probably would join this power group, this political party, because there is power in numbers, in order to enforce your telos on other creatures. There's no way of getting around it. That is the intrinsic nature of life, is the will to power. If you're going to live, you have to enforce your ought-to-bes on everyone else. That's what morality comes down to. That's what society and life comes down to. Anything else is a denial of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I'd have to spend some time thinking about it. But it's very interesting. And I definitely will.
Check out my 5-point lecture. It's Whose Will to Power is Morality, and it goes through. It's a critique of Sam Harris's moral landscape, Matt Slick. So it's a critique of both atheistic and theistic claims to objective morality. But I also tie the will to power in that.
Yeah.
So
and I'm by no means saying that that scientific truth needs to be the only truth, or that anything like that is the case. Because things can be true without, the scientific method being applied.
Why do you seek truth? That in itself, the very motive for you seeking truth is a illustration of the will to power. Why do you seek truth? You do it because it's power. And when it isn't power, you won't seek truth. And this is why Nietzsche asks, why the will to truth? Why not the denial of truth? Well,
why not?
Because
I wonder, I'm forgetting what the what the theory is, that what Sherlock Holmes once famously said, but it's along the lines of, you want you want to look for, a theory to suit the data rather than you twist the theory to suit the data rather than twisting the data to suit the theory. And that's what I always wonder with overarching theories. In general, if you look at Marxism is often very similar the same way. That might not be what's happening here, but it's why I always I try to think and ruminate and figure out what exactly is going on, if that makes any sense.
Do you eat meat?
Very little, but not much.
Okay, so but you initiate your telos over other organisms in order to accomplish your telos. This is the nature of life. Trees seek to extend their roots even at the expense, maybe not consciously, of course, but even at the expense of other plants. Other plants climb and utilize the other trees in order to reach the sunlight. Animals are constantly initiating their will to survive, their will to power over other animals. It's simply the nature of life. Again, we don't have to use this as a metaphysical term. We could just see this as a psychological mechanism. But I don't want to go any further into that, but I just wanted to make that clear.
Cool. Well,
So
definitely have to look into it.
I guess I just brought that up because while I wasn't trying to argue for idealism in general. I was simply trying to be honest and say, look, here's a problem with the materialistic side of things. This is why I was emphasizing the problem of language, and here's the problem with the Solipsist view.
James, what are your objections to materialism?
My objections to materialism is that materialism, it depends on what you mean by materialism, but for one, materialism is unprovable, and it cannot deal with consciousness. It presupposes consciousness.
After the panel that you appeared on with the late Christopher Hitchens,
I'm sure I don't have to go into that. I'm sure you guys are educated, and maybe I've read some of the work of Chalmers and other.
Yeah, I did philosophy Chalmers all the way.
You then referred to in your debate with Richard Carrier while he was there.
You're aware of the hard problem of consciousness. You're probably aware that we're never going to be able to solve this problem by looking through the objective,
Dawkins is so popular because
the hard problem of consciousness. Is that the one about accounting for qualia?
Inept, sophomoric, they cannot think logically, uninformed,
what I say to
silly,
that is that it's
ignorant, and the result,
it's based on
this is your word,
linguistic at bottom.
of an educational system that has been dumbed down.
I mean, your qualia is determined by, everyone has different qualia.
Or is this just a glimpse of the real William Lane Craig?
Well, I
we don't
think
know
it's
that,
a glimpse
but
of the real
we know
William
that some
Lane
people
Craig.
have qualia.
Well, but it's language, though. That's what the subjective experience.
I don't know that, but
culture changes it. For example, my experience of
describe what an ad hominem
beer is not the same
means
thing
literally
as
against
Daniel
the
Dennett's
man.
experience of beer.
And what an ad hominem argument would be is that the reason you reject his conclusion is because you attack
he's saying that you can point to a constituent that may be indicative of red, but you can never point to red itself.
No, wait, no, let me.
Like, as in the mind,
it would
what
be
the part
like
of the
saying
brain produces.
My conclusions are
you
wrong
could point
because
towards
I've
the
said
material
all of these
that
nasty
is
things.
what
See,
the
that would be
brain
an ad
perceives
hominem
as
argument.
red, but you can
But
never
in none
point
of
to
these
the
cases
actual
that you've
perception
quoted,
of
where
red.
you've compiled words
Right,
I
this
can
has
point to my
nothing to
strung together at once.
There's my
You put them
perception of
together.
red.
In none of these
Redness
cases, I think,
itself.
will you find
You're
that
not going
I've
to probe in the
ever
brain and
rejected
find
person's
the feeling
argument
of
or
satisfaction.
conclusion
You're not going to
on
find,
that
this ties
basis.
into Leibniz's
Rather, these were
mill,
probably
the
said in response to
China
questions
room
like
illustration.
tonight, where I said some pretty negative things
You're never going to
about,
find the
folks
first person
rejecting
experience
God for emotional
qualia.
reasons
That's what
rather
we mean
than
by
intellectual
qualia
reasons. And I
itself
would
in the brain. You're just going to
certainly
find
reiterate what I said about
rising
the lack
levels of dopamine,
sophistication
lowering levels of
and the
dopamine,
dumbed-down educational system.
decreased
in
blood
no
flow.
case
You're not going to
is
find
this
the
committing
first
an ad
person
hominem
experience.
fallacy
That's
where I
the
say
problem with
that their
materialism. It always
conclusions are
presupposes a
wrong
mechanism.
because of
In a
those things.
materialist
I'm
one,
just-
it's that.
I've
And
been
these things
asked
are
to
not, they're
characterize
aspatial,
certain
atemporal. I mean, I would recommend a good video by Ontologistics. He's done a great series on this, illustrating that double aspect theory is actually a necessary truth, and that materialism fails.
Let me use an
At
analogy.
most, it would be impolite, maybe. You could
You
indict
keep
me for
saying,
being
and I've
impolite.
heard this a lot, if we
Okay.
go inside the
Sure.
brain, we won't find the quote-unquote experience of that. We'll find neurons firing in, aggregate, right?
Right.
It seems analogous to say something like, well, if we dive into a, what's it called? Like a tornado or a vortex in a pool, we're not going to find an atom. We're not going to find the vortex atom, right? Or similarly, we're not going to find the wet atom. No, wetness, vortices, those are emergent properties, if you will, that are created by aggregates. It seems almost to me to be kind of like a fallacy of division going on there.
No, I'm not. First of all, I'm not arguing for dualism. Double aspect theory is a monist position. I'm arguing.
Well, no. What I'm saying though is that you do find redness in the brain in the sense that you find aggregates of neurons, which together do produce the experience of red, and that's what you find. You're not going to just like the vortex or the whirlpool. You're not going to find the whirlpool atom or the whirlpool molecule. The whirlpool only comes about through a process of those atoms acting together.
Well,
Here's the problem with experience of red does.
Here's the issue with things being emergent, like in the mind. Whenever you look at like emergence, right? Say like an anthill or a vortex, a tornado. The vortex is made of a number of. You can break the vortex down into a whole bunch of separate air molecules, or the anthill down into sand and ants, right? But the problem is if the qualia are emergent, then you could, in theory, the introspection break them down into neural correlates, and therefore deduce neural correlates simply by your neurons simply by your introspective experience. And we can't do that. That's why we have neuroscience in the first place. So.
But it's not mere correlation either. There is.
Take out the word correlate. Take out the word correlate. So let's just say that it is the neurons. And then we have the qualia, and we try and break the qualia down into neurons or, parts of neurons or whatever. No matter how much you try and break red down, you cannot deduce neurons out of that.
Kind of look at it like this.
Well, that's not what red is.
It's not that there's two different substances or usias. It's that there's two different perspectives of the same entity. They're numerically one. There's not two different things we're looking at. It's the same thing. So this first-person experience is what it's like to be a body. It is what it's like to be human, to be a brain. So this is not a dualist thing. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that this, as long as science, materialist science, is a third-person perspective, it is always looking in the objective perspective for the subjective experience, which it cannot find from that perspective because it's a logical contradiction. One is subjective, the other is objective.
Well, the issue that I have with this is there are a lot of underpinning assumptions about what qualia are and what their nature are, or if they're even a valid construct by which we could actually examine something. It's one of the questions because at least I know from the field of artificial intelligence, I can tell a computer to sense, quote unquote, something that is red, or I could write or to sense a click. To be able to take in an outside input. The question is whether qualia could be in some way just a functional construct that is an illusion, albeit one, or albeit a very convincing one, or if it actually is something substantive in terms of the subjective experience. I think that that's something that is fundamentally unanswerable from any paradigm because it's one of those things that I just don't think is knowable.
Right.
Well, this ties into the fact-value problem, of course. When we're talking about mind-body problem, we're actually talking about fact value. We're talking about a fact, which is a body. It's a empirically testable thing. It's objective. It has objective shape. There can't be a, it's like shapes are objective in the sense that, a square can't be a circle, and a circle can't be a square. And then color is objective in the sense that it can't be, it can't be blue, can't be red, right? But the problem is that, like when we talk about the is-ought, right? So there is something that is the case. We'll say the body or humans have evolved to be altruistic, but that doesn't mean they ought to be altruistic, right? So there is a dichotomy here of fact value, and when we're talking about, they're just two different epistemologies. One is a feeling of, or an awareness of what it's like to be this thing internally and from that perspective. And the other one is what it's like to be looking from externally. So I think a lot of times materialists and double aspect theorists end up arguing over this, and there really isn't that much difference, except that the materialist actually ends up being a dualist in the end, because they're saying that there is this emergent property. There is this property that is different from. Let me finish. That is different from this entity. And what double aspect theory is saying, no, they are numerically one. They're the same entity. It's just two different perspectives. And this is, I've really watered this down a lot. There's more to double aspect theory than this, but for the sake of this discussion.
Couldn't you say that?
The only issue that I ever have with is I wonder, the issue is in some ways that when you have these discussions, it ends up just sort of, and this is just a comment on the discussion, is that it sort of devalues what neuroscience has been able to accomplish. And Raatz is here, and no, you're not doing that. But I worry sometimes about it, because I've had, Raatz on multiple occasions that said, well, yes, they're just merely correlations. And I go, no, they're not. You need to actually see what is this. I can explain the physiology. I can explain the, what the chemicals are. But the issue is a lot of this kind of stuff does cause people, to not have, to place as a priority this area of research, because in my opinion, I think the brain is the last black box of the body in terms of something as a unit.
But you were the one that said it's unknowable.
I think it is on some level.
Then why does it matter if people de-emphasize research on it? Sorry.
Because there's other things that come from research on consciousness that are good for people, such as cognitive therapies for people with brain damage from war zones. There's a lot of good that comes from studying consciousness.
Sam.
Sure.
I would say that.
I want to ask a question. Just so I can understand make sure I got your position right. When you, I said, it's just a correlate, and you said it's not. What you were referring to, correct me if I'm wrong, you were saying basically that were you referring to the fact that we can find that the structures of neural firings map to the structures of consciousness?
No, and see, this is what always happens, is when I was describing some of the connections that evidently are there with the brain to the mind, when I've talked with you and Inspiring Philosophy, I've had the issue of where you'll just say, oh, you mean just the correlations, when actually there are a lot of detailed mechanistic ideas of how things are happening in the brain, but there is no model of consciousness that holds right now. It's just not, it's not there. And it may never get there. We have to accept the fact that there are unknowable things.
Yeah, right. That's good. That's better.
Hello, guys.
I was gonna say that if
Give me a second.
the notion of what it's like.
Wait, I got it. I'll do it.
The notion of what it's like,
Do you mind?
I think is at bottom of a problem of linguistics, because
I do.
if
Okay, give me
you
a freaking
had
minute.
no sort of platform on which you could build concepts of a certain experience, for example, if you didn't have any mood, if you had no,
Guys,
yeah?
we gotta end the show because 2 hours is up and stuff.
Okay. I was gonna say that.
I have to go in about 10 minutes anyway, so.
Why do we have to... Wait, what's going on?
2 hours is not up, Strife. Just let it go for 10 more minutes. 8:30. That'll be an hour and a half.
2 hours? I thought 2 hours, that'd be 11, wouldn't it?
9 to,
It's 10:20.
Well, I'm really fucking falling asleep again, yeah.
Okay. I was gonna say that if you had a certain experience, that experience only exists if you have language, if you can make sense of it, essentially. So, the notion of what it's like only exists if there is language, if there is culture, if there's age, if there is mood. Otherwise, I mean.
And what about beings without language? They don't have experience?
They do have experience, but they can't make sense of it. For example, if you look at a building, you can see a building, but if you don't have language, you can't make sense of it. You can't make, if you...
I disagree. Look at ape biology and ape behavior. They still have the cognitive mechanisms to sort things into concepts and
Well, it's not only
concepts.
language. It's not only language. They have mood. They have moods, for example. They have culture. They have, well, not culture. Well, to some degree, I guess. But they have age. They have past. So
there's not that much that's special about human beings. I hate to.
I know.
Cognitively, I mean, we're the major. My opinion is that the only major breakthrough is language, because it allows us to then have culture, which is a form of sexual selection.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that without those things, you can't have first-person experience. Which is why robots. I think that's the problem. I think otherwise you're just an autonomous robot. The reason that we don't feel that way is because of language, is because of we have emotions, is because of moods and things like that.
Well, I would say, I mean, would you say that dogs have experiences?
To some degree, to a lesser degree, though. But flies, for example, a horsefly barely has any experience, any sense of experience of what it's like to land on a pie on a sunny day.
Well, I mean, I
don't know about that.
I mean, I don't know that much about insect neurobiology. I don't.
The brain is the size of a grain of sand. So, like, I mean, it can't...
I mean, this sounds a lot like it's a very, very bold claim.
What,
I don't see why
okay, go.
any amount of
it's not
brain
even
is not
5 minutes.
produced. I don't see why. I mean, I can imagine like a arbitrarily small brain producing an arbitrarily small amount of conscious experience in it.
Well, I mean, the question's more just having the cortical wiring to be able to process these things and having the proper structures.
But, for example, with babies, they already have that, but yet they don't develop a sense of self until around 9 months. So while they're having experiences, they don't know it. So since they can't make sense of what they're doing, then that's just...
Well, it's the fact that their hippocampus doesn't convert memory properly until around 4 or 5 years old. That doesn't have to do with sense of self.
Stop it! I'm trying to do this.
I mean, it has to do with the long-term potentiation of the hippocampus not being as efficient when you're a young child.
If there was no memory or identity.
I'm not looking.
Well, we're talking. I mean, the reason that we don't have memory from that young is because the brain just can't do it from a physical perspective.
I agree.
It's not because of this abstract concept of. I mean, I'm assuming you're referring to like Piaget's ideas of child development going through stages, but you can't take these abstract concepts and not look at the actual constraints. Which is one of my. Yeah. I mean, we could save it for a later time. It's a good exploration.
Yeah.
For sure.
But I'm saying that first-person experience, I mean, I think it requires, I don't think the problem of consciousness is that hard, because qualia exists because of things like language and the brain. I don't know that's what generates the first-person subjective experience.
You're saying
Can we have final statements and we'll talk about this another time?
You're saying that color is a product of language?
Yes, actually, yes, because yes, it is, because there's a tribe that cannot differentiate between blue and green. In Japanese, there is no distinct word for blue and distinct word for green.
Oh, this is the Whorf hypothesis.
Yeah, I don't see how that follows, buddy. In fact,
I can send you a video. Wait, can I send? What's your user?
No, hey, this is a linguistics. This is the Whorf hypothesis.
Sapir hypothesis.
Yeah, Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, and it's. I mean, there's some evidence to it, but then also,
It's great
it's
pleasure
not,
and a privilege to
there's
share something with you this.
It's correlation versus causation, which is, this is one of the notorious theories where it's an issue, because you can't distinguish whether the concepts are built out of environmental necessity or linguistic necessity. A famous example is the fact that there's a tribe Whorf tried to make a point that there was a tribe in South America, I believe, that told east and west by east was, and I might be mixing this up, is to the mountain, whereas west was to the river. However, one could easily point out, and they said, well, that's how they told it. But Sapir and Whorf had concluded, oh, this is because their language shapes the way that they view East and West. When anyone with common sense can say, well, the same thing could be happening because they don't have compasses, and you can tell East and West by the sun, and those are the two outstanding landmarks.
But
right now, also let me just say this. If you look at, I know there was a documentary on this not too long ago, but if you look at when men actually started to have art, to make pictures, before they even had a language, really, they went down into these deep caves because there was total darkness, and because of this total darkness, they would have hallucinations. So if you look on all these old cave paintings, you'll see these dots, these like fuzzy carpet-looking dots. And
like Lascaux? Like in Lascaux Cave in France?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So you see that because there's a sense deprivation, and that's what happens when you have sense deprivation. And so these colors are already innately there, and they're deriving these pictures of things that they've seen, like, antelope and different animals, but they're seeing it in a really distorted and artistic way, intense way.
Guys, can we end this? Can we end this? Can we have final statement?
Strife.
Sorry, but I gotta
not
go.
Even 10.
All right.
And also, Johan, you're the guy who fixed your mic.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So, Polymath, you want to go first?
I posted a video. You know Bot to Bits, right? The YouTube user Bot to Bits.
Yeah, I've seen him.
Yeah, I posted a video in the chat. Well, let me post it right now. But it talks about sort of qualia and things like that. I'd also recommend Daniel Dennett's um, sorts of material when it comes to consciousness because he talks a lot about this. So, but thanks for letting me on.
James Stillwell.
Yes. Wow. What do I say here? I wasn't there for the show, so I don't know how that went. But it was definitely a lively discussion concerning solipsism and consciousness and
I think that was the AfterShow.
I don't know. Is that what we're on right now?
Yes.
The after show? Jesus. All right. Well, anyways, thanks for the good convo.
Okay, Raatz.
Thanks for the good conversation also, and I'm actually looking forward to the idealism debate next week.
It's a question, what is the universe essentially? Physical or mental?
Oh, that's... Okay. Oh, is that the question you're asking me now, or...?
No, that's next week.
Oh, that's next week. That's right.
Yes. Sam, your turn.
Always fun. I had a very trying day in terms of sort of discussing something with inspiring philosophy in a comment section, and we actually, I'm in the middle of talking. Where the fuck are your manners?
I'm wrapping up.
Sorry.
Stop it, I'm wrapping up.
I can be polite and say fuck. It's possible. So that was a little bit trying. And it actually led to me doing a lot of reading, which was very interesting. And I have a lot of lab work that I've gotten a huge breakthrough in. So good day, and I had a good time. And to quote another rap lyric to end my send-off, which will become my tradition, bitches ain't shit but hoes and tricks.
Yeah, so hope you had a good time on the Line to Go show after show. Tune in next week on Saturday, which will be the idealism versus realism debate / discussion, I guess, pretty much. Not sure what's going to go on Sunday. So tune in next week. Signing off. And good night, I guess.